with Dathan Ritzenhein 3 days before New York City Marathon.
Yep.
I mean, we just talked. How you feeling right now? Are you nervous, excited, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's just been. I'm a little bit nervous now that I got here and it's actually happening. It feels like everything was just, for the longest time, it was flying by, and then the last 3 weeks it's just been a crawl. It's like now that it's getting close, it just every day seems to take so much longer. There's a lot less time where you're training, especially in the last week, and so I really haven't done any double runs maybe in a week, and so it's like now I have the afternoon, and so it just feels like it's crawling along, and so I think that's naturally what makes you a little bit more nervous too as things come along, and so there's just a lot more time to think, and that's the hardest part. It's a waiting game.
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at the fields. I'm sure you have too. There are a few good Africans, but you're right up there in terms of the top guys. Have you thought about winning? Is that something that's crossed your mind that you think?
Yeah, I've done a lot of visualizing, a lot of thinking about that, and it's something that it's been a dream for a long time. I ran my first marathon here 10 years ago, and I went in very naive and didn't quite respect the distance probably, and the competitors who have done so much at that. And so when I did that, went in and I made so many mistakes going in, and so now I look at it and I have a lot of respect for this because it's beat me up so many times, and a lot of times I thought I was ready to go and I wasn't, and a lot of times I surprised myself. I felt like I wasn't ready to go and I did great, and so I just have to trust in where I'm at in training and the things that I've done that I haven't. You can't fake in training, like some workouts you can fake a little bit. There's no faking some of the things that I did, and so it has to give me confidence going in, and so but I can't dictate what Stanley Biwott or DeCisa have done either, and so you don't really know until race day. And so I can control what I've done and try to minimize mistakes. I was running with Meb in the park a little bit yesterday, and that's basically what he said. He's like, well, you can't, like when he ran really well and won here in Boston, you can't really dictate what everybody else has done, and you just have to minimize. You have to make the right decisions in the race, and if you put yourself in that spot in training that you're good enough that you can do it, it's great. But if the best you can do on that day is finish third, fourth, whatever, you just have to be able to come out when it gets hard, because no matter what, it gets hard. Like 20 to 26 miles is hard no matter what, and so you have to be able to rally yourself mentally, I think, at that point. So that's where I'm kind of at right now. I've done a lot of visualizing, but I just try to keep myself confident in the stuff that I've done leading up to it.
When you ran that 60-12 at Great North Run, were you surprised at all by how fast you were, how close you were to home?
I wasn't totally surprised. I felt like I had been doing that kind of work in training, but you never know either, because some of the stuff that I've been doing is a lot different than other training too, and so I didn't have a lot of benchmark workouts to go off from. I just had workouts that I said, well, that was pretty good. I don't know if I could have done that before, and so I went in feeling that I was really ready, but at the same time I just didn't know if that would translate, and so I just figured he's coming off Rio, he's fast, he's fit. I got to make it fast. I feel like, and I just went at a pace. I didn't look at my watch. I just went at a pace that I felt like was feeling comfortable and like I could sustain. And so, I think that's one of the tough things at New York sometimes is feeling like you always got to be in the pack, or you always got to make the right decision. And sometimes you got to do what feels right at the time. And so I don't know. I don't have a game plan going in, I guess, like where I'm going to sit for 20 miles and not make a move, or I don't plan on I don't have a point at 8 miles where I'm going to drop the hammer, but I have to make that decision in the race, make the right one, and so I think a lot of it will just be based off of how I'm feeling at that time, and if I feel like this is what feels comfortable, then I got to go.
Yeah. If you look at New York the last couple of years, it's been decided in the park, that last 10K. Yeah. I know your first 2 go-rounds here, that was sort of where you struggled. Do you feel like that you're now ready to really crush that last 10K? Have you done anything specifically to prepare for that?
I think I've trained very differently than I did the last 2 times I ran here, and so very differently. My total volume of work going in is probably the same, but it's been spread out over a little bit longer period of time, and so I think the biggest thing, I have not done anything steady in workouts. Everything's been hard pace changing, coming back into something, going at 4:30 pace for a little while, going back into 5:15 pace, A lot of hard workouts like that where I wanted to be ready for it. And I think going into both of those races the last time, I did a lot of steady things where I'd lock into a hard pace, 450 pace, and just go for as long as I could go. And I haven't done that very much. I've done a lot of hard long runs that were, where I'd run 5:10 to 5:20 pace for most of the 20 miles, but it's been slower than marathon pace. The stuff that I've done in the tempo type work, it's been a lot of just pace changing, going back and forth type work, and so that's something I've been going back basically since early July doing, whereas even before I really started training for the marathon, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Ben Rosario earlier this week, and he was essentially saying that Americans don't really, generally they don't train that way to respond to this hard, 4:30 or 4:35 late in the marathon. I mean, is that something you've seen, and was there a particular thing that changed your mind about it?
Absolutely. For me, I think that was a big part, is coming off from the bridge those two times. I came off from the bridge and had been running 5 to 5:10 type pace, and all of a sudden running 4:30, 4:40, that's very hard. I mean, it's hard to do a 4:30 or 4:40 mile just period, let alone after 16 miles of running hard. And so a lot of times it's not so much not having done enough speed work. Like speed work, anybody can run hard for 800 meter repeats, but like having the power to be able to do that is a different thing. And then being able to absorb the byproduct of that, so to speak. Like, I mean, your blood lactate levels rise like crazy when you do that. And a lot of times what happens, I think, with people is that they just can't handle that influx, and it burns a lot of fuel. But I've tried to train myself to be able to tolerate it. And so whether or not that works, we'll see, I guess. I mean, that's one thing that I've done very differently, though, than in the past. And so it served me well. I know it's less of a fuel issue, like at the half marathon, but at the Great North Run, I felt like that. Every time there was a hill, every time where the pace picked up, I was able to come back out of it, and I feel okay, and I feel fresh again. Even at the end, I was tired. Like, I mean, it was a hard race, but I felt like I was recovering very quickly. And so, but that's very hard to do. And so, like, I didn't go quite as far in distance as I would do. Like, I would never did like 18-mile tempo runs like that. 15 was the max that I did during that.
You talked about changing the training behind this build-up, but also, do you think your surroundings and location being back home and different from your past approaches coming in?
Partially, what made it, I could do that because I was at sea level. It's harder to do at altitude. I mean, you can't run if you run a 4:30 mile at altitude, it's very hard to come back, unless you slow down to a significantly slow jog. Whereas at sea level, you can do that. And so I trained for 2010 New York at altitude, and 2006 I was in Boulder at the time, so I trained at altitude. I train well at sea level. I mean, altitude definitely helps, but for me, I don't know if I struggle sometimes training at altitude. Like, it makes me tired easy, and so it's just another stressor on the body. And so I've been able to do that, those kind of hard, pace changes, because I've been home at sea level, and so I've tried to do it in locations where I could get exactly what I needed, but not too much. So I try to do a lot of work. Like, all my longer tempos were on a rail trail that was paved, but a lot of my hard long runs, about half of my hard long runs, were on dirt roads, and all my intervals and easy runs are mostly on dirt roads. And so I try to get that stressor of the pavement, in the hard sessions, but I really have to be careful to try to recover between them. And so, but at the same time, I try to train on really not uneven, but hilly terrain too, just because it's easy for me to get consumed at the pace sometimes. And so if I go and I run a really hilly, I ran a really hilly 22 miler at 5:25 pace. But it's easier for me to be like, okay, if I get on the flat, I just start trying to run marathon, like 5-minute pace almost. And so that it gets a little dangerous sometimes.
How do you feel your fitness compares to some of your best marathons, the Olympics in 2008 and Chicago in 2012?
Chicago in 2012, I spent a lot of time just being self-coached. I spent a lot of time looking over my old training logs, trying to see, because the training is different. And so But I did do some things very similar to 2012 Chicago, and my volume was pretty much exactly the same for the past 3 months as it was then. It was not as high at the peak. I didn't go up to 120, but I ran 6 days a week, which is very different from what I was doing before. I never took days off. I ran 6 days a week, but the same amount of volume as I was doing before 2012. I definitely less pure speed, because I wasn't coming off from track season, but a lot more what I would consider like hard VO2 type intervals where the rest was short, and trying to. I didn't go over. I think I did one that was 7 miles, but there's always 6 to 7 miles of hard intervals instead of doing like 10 or 12 times a mile. I tried to save that for the longer tempo type day, and so that was a big difference.
So from being self-coached,